Well, hello. Welcome back to Toy Thursday with Johnny Tiger. The date is April 28th, 2022. Today is Holocaust Remembrance Day over there in Israel, and Jewish people all over the world is spending this day uh, remembering those that have been lost during the Second World War. And of course, for those of us who have been paying attention to the news and watching what's going on between Russia and Ukraine, thinking about the Second World War suddenly taking on an entire different feeling. I mean, a lot of us like to think that it's all behind us, that we no longer do things like that things like that don't happen anymore. Second World War, I mean, come on, that's like, almost 80 years ago. So you would think in 80 years, we human beings must have evolved beyond that. We must have become more enlightened and more civilized. Apparently not. So, since it is Holocaust Remembrance Day, I'm going to show you guys a character that is perhaps one of the most famous or infamous character in action figure form and uh, in comic book, cartoon, movie character. But before that, take a look at this homemade backdrop that I made up this Tuesday. Oh, one of my friend Ian mentioned that when I show action figure photos or videos, it would be nice to have a backdrop uh, to sort of for them to show off better. And so, since I was too cheap to go out and buy one, I decided, hey, I can make one, no problem. So what I did, as you guys can see here, is about 2 feet wide and about 2 feet tall, and it is made up of interlacing and stapling together a bunch of paper. These are not just regular paper. These are paper made specifically for blind people to write braille, to read braille on. These are much thicker than your regular paper. I secured them onto a little uh, divider thing that's used to hold up some kind of signs or post. And then I noticed that it wasn't working because the height and the width of the paper would actually tip the whole thing over, and it was floppy and unwieldy. So what I ended up doing, I took a little plastic canister and taped it to the bottom of the base and filled it with steel BBs from my BB gun. Now that gives us a lot more weight so it doesn't tip over. And to cut down on how floppy the paper was, I taped chopsticks and plastic utensils all along the back to give it kind of a skeletal frame so it's more stable. So what I need you guys to tell me, if you feel like it, is if this is effective. I don't know if it's big enough, wide enough, tall enough to serve its purpose. I hope it is, but because it's so easy to make, I can increase the size however I want. So if you guys think it should be taller or wider, that is very simple to do. So with that, now we're going to bring in our Holocaust survivor of the day. His first name was Max Eisenhardt, but most people don't know him by that name. Most people know him as one of the deadliest, strongest, most powerful mutant, sometimes hero, sometimes anti-hero, but most times villain from Marvel Comics. Most people know him simply as Magneto. But let me take you back to Magneto's tragic past, because this supervillain, superhero, whoever he may be, one of the most powerful mutants on Earth, had one of the most tragic, sad past. And once you know what happened to him, it's not hard to imagine why he's such an extreme individual. Born somewhere around 1926, Max Eisenhardt born in a Jewish family. Around 1940, he witnessed firsthand his entire family being executed by the Nazis at the concentration camp. Through some act of miracle and a definite act of survivalism, Max Eisenhardt survived from being executed. However, that did not save him because he soon found himself being sent to yet another concentration camp. And it was there when he finally met and fell in love with a gypsy girl called Magna. Now, Max and Magna were, at this point, just people who were trying to survive in the concentration camp. While at the concentration camp, Max Eisenhardt, still a kid at this point, witnessed how cruel human beings were capable of toward those that they deemed different from them. He witnessed people conducting science experiments using the prisoners at the concentration camp, genetic, biological, chemistry experiment being conducted on people. Most people didn't make it, and some people got turned into human monsters. One day, there was a revolt at the concentration camp, and Max and Magna took this chance to escape into the mountains. Soon after Max took Magna, the two of them were married and had a baby at this point, and they escaped all the way across the border into the Soviet, the Russia, in another word, and he hired a forger to change his name to Eric Lansher, so he wouldn't be found and caught by the Nazis. So Max, or now known as Eric, and his young wife Magna and their young baby found themselves a home in Russia. And you would think that finally things would take a turn for the better, but no. One day, when Eric was working in the factory, he realized that his boss was cheating him. Wasn't The boss wasn't planning on paying him. In a fit of rage, he attacked his boss and left the factory. When he got back to where him and his family were living, he realized that the building was on fire and his baby daughter was stuck on the top floor. In desperation, he tried to go to the aid of his daughter, but unbeknownst to him, his boss called in a bunch of corrupt city officials and police who arrived at that time. And the police and city officials physically assaulted his wife and beat him up and held him down while he watched as his daughter burned to death in the fire. Well, unfortunate for these corrupt officials, the grief and rage that Eric, or aka Max, was experiencing finally triggered his mutation. His mutant power manifested itself, and in a display of incredible power, he killed everybody there and destroyed a large part of the city as revenge for his daughter. When some of the policemen tried to shoot him in the head, they found that bullets had no effect on him because, well, his superpower is magnetism. We'll talk a little bit about that after we finish his backstory, but suffice to say, anything made of metal is under this guy's control. So bullets wouldn't go near him, and he instead forced their guns to turn on their owner, and all the police basically got shot with a gun in their own hand. A little bit later, Eric Lencher started working uh, for some secret branch of the United States, tracking down war criminals from the Nazis. For a period of time, Eric Lencher really was trying to put his superpower to good use, uh, fighting for the cause of the righteous, prosecuting war criminals, tracking them down, making sure that they got what they deserved. However, one day he had sort of a disagreement in policy with the agency that he was working for. Now, we don't really know who he was working for. It could be the CIA, it could be the FBI, it could be Homeland Security, it could be some other secret government organization. But whatever the case, the organization suddenly decided that Eric was too much of a liability. So they wanted to teach him a lesson. So the agency murdered his girlfriend in front of him. And needless to say, Eric went berserk and killed everyone sent by the agency. And from that day on, he decided that no more, no more being Mr. Nice Guy. I tried to be good, and then look what happened to me. First, they murdered my parents in front of my eyes, and then they murdered my daughter in front of my eyes, and then now they murdered my girlfriend in front of my eyes. No more, no more being upstanding citizen. So from that day on, Eric Lencher decided to call himself Magneto and use his superpower for one means only. And that goal was he was going to be the savior of all the mutants. He was going to make sure that no mutant would go through what he went through. All the mutants was going, no mutant was going to be prosecuted and murdered by regular human beings. And mutants have rights too. Mutant lives matter. Blah blah blah. You guys don't know how that goes. Anyway, so that's basically how Magneto, the supervillain, became a saint. Uh, he's not really what you would call a usual supervillain because he's not concerned himself with making a lot of money. He doesn't work. He's not worried about dominating the world. All he really wants from beginning to end was to make sure that other mutants would never go through what he went through and mutants could live peacefully without being prosecuted by humans. Now, of course, because Eric, or aka Magneto, had gone through so much pain and suffering in his life that his method of achieving what he wanted had always been very, very extreme. Now let's take a look at what kind of power are we talking about with Magneto. Those of you who know your Marvel comics and your X-Men character would have know most of this already. Magneto wears a uniform that consists of a lot of metallic fibers in it, and with his control over magnetism, he can, with a blink of an eye, turn his regular clothes into like a suit of armor. In addition to that, he wears a helmet on his head. I know the one you're looking at right now is an unhelmeted one, so you can see his face. But usually, uh, he wears a helmet that looks a little bit like a motorcycle helmet that prevent anyone from getting into his brain, from telepathically attacking his mind or his brain, because that is really his biggest weakness. Other than being afraid of being mentally controlled or mentally attacked, Magneto really is one of the most powerful beings on the planet. Now, I will say this: when I first learned about Magneto back in 1995, when I first heard of the X-Men and Magneto, and I learned about their superpower, how different mutants have different powers, I wasn't too impressed. Okay, I mean, okay, to me, this guy can control metal. So what? So he can wave his hand, and he's basically like a giant magnet, and things, metallic things like kitchen knife will fly to him. So what? Like that's my very shallow understanding of what magnetism was. However, when you really get into Magneto's history, looking at some of the things that he was able to do, this guy is crazy. For example, he can use his control over metal to generate powerful lightning to blast people with. He can also generate such a powerful magnetic force field around himself to defend himself, and that force field has withstood nuclear weapon, plasma fire, and direct exposure to punches and attacks from the Incredible Hulk and Hercules and some of the strongest characters in Marvel Universe. Magneto also can reverse gravity because gravity really is just magnetism. So he can reverse gravity, allowing himself to fly. The time is now 4. And because, like we said, gravity is essentially magnetism. In the core of the Earth is the largest magnet on this planet. So, by that logic, Magneto's power is in direct relation to the Earth. He is powered by this whole planet. The core of the planet give him his power. There was one chapter where Magneto actually saved the world. The Earth was going to fall apart because of some nuclear devastating event, and Magneto used his control over magnetism and held the entire planet together just by himself. I mean, come on, that's crazy. There were also other displays of his power, such as when killer robots were sent to hunt him down, he was able to destroy these giant robots. I mean, these robots are like 100 feet tall, and Magneto just clenches his fist, and the robot just crumples like it's made of tin can. He could also destroy spaceship without even needing to get close to them. There were instances where alien invaders come to attack Earth, and Magneto just look at their spaceship, and again he just clenched his fist, and spaceship just whoop, crumpled together like a soda can. This guy's power is phenomenal. It's crazy, and it's not just regular conventional metal that he can interact with. Those of you who've seen the movies, I'm sure have you remember the scene in X-Men, I believe X-Men 2, where Magneto was able to control and utilize the iron in human blood and in organic matter. So he could essentially pull all the blood out of a person just with his thought alone, killing people that way. There was one there was one story in the comic book where Wolverine. Now, those of you who don't know, Wolverine is one of the toughest superhero, like one of the toughest fighter. His entire bone is this super metal that make him almost indestructible. So anyway, you know where this is going, okay? You got a guy who control metal fighting a guy whose skeleton is made of metal, and yes, it was not pretty. Wolverine went to stab Magneto, and Magneto, in retaliation, ripped his entire skeleton out of his body. Wow. I mean, ouch. That's just like some crazy, crazy stuff. This guy's power just go on and on. So, like I said, we are barely scratching the surface, but by now you can tell that this guy impressed the heck out of me, and is definitely deserved of the title to be one of the strongest, most dangerous beings in the comic book, uh, at least on Earth. Anyway, so anyway, that is basically the background of Magneto. This once prosecuted Jewish boy who watched his entire family murdered in front of him by Nazi Germany, and later had his daughter died in a fire because of some corrupt Russian officials, and then had his girlfriend murdered by the United States agency that he ended up working for, becoming one of the most powerful beings on the planet, and saved the Earth, saved the world more than once. Of course, he also put the world in danger more than once. So, like I said, sometimes he's a villain, sometimes he's a hero. Let's look at the Magneto I have in my collection. I'm going to take you back in a little time machine from when I was a child. The first Magneto action figure I got was back in, I believe, 1994, maybe 95. Like I said, I wasn't very impressed with the character because I didn't know much about him. All I was told was this guy control magnetism. So I was like, okay, so he's a giant magnet. So what? So what? And his action figure back then didn't look very impressive. He was very skinny, and he had this weird pinched legged stance, like his feet were so close together that they were narrower than his hip, which means he tipped over all the time. And he also, like I said, very narrow, very skinny, uh, and he his helmet kind of looked like a motorcycle helmet, and he had a gimmick built into him that there's a lever that you pull on his back that would make his eyes glow. Sounds cool, but that lever most of the time wouldn't even work, and sometimes when you pull the lever, it produced this really weird sulfuric smell in the action figure. I don't know what they did there, but it's just really weird. Anyway, I do not have that action figure anymore. That was sold when with my most of my collection back when I was a teenager. However, I did keep one of the Magneto action figure that I got later. This one I'm going to show you right now came from I believe 1997 or 98. So it definitely has a bit of a retro and vintage status in my collection. This Magneto looked very, very different from the Magneto that most of us were exposed to. This Magneto is very good looking, and this was the Magneto that made me sort of take a second interest in the character and really look into who this guy was. Now, why does this one look so different? I mean, you guys can see this one sadly doesn't have his helmet anymore because the helmet was removable and it went missing during one of my big moves to a different house. Um, but you can see that unlike most of the other Magneto, this one seemed more chiseled and he got beautiful, beautiful hair. I mean that this is very nice looking hair. Magneto is usually drawn with a really short, almost like military style haircut, but this version of Magneto has this long, like braided ponytail look that I really like. And this version also seemed to be a little bit more armored up, we can say, than the regular Magneto. Now, when I first encountered this action figure, this was made, like I said, 1997, 98 by Toy Biz. This was still when they made action figure kind of small. So this guy is barely 5 inches tall, maybe a little bit more than 5 inches tall. Definitely too small to fit in my collection today. But when I first encountered this, I thought, is that just like a young Magneto? Is that what he looked like when he's young? No, this is not just a young Magneto. This is Magneto from an alternate universe. This is Magneto from the story uh, Age of Apocalypse. In the Age of Apocalypse timeline, basically, there's this mad mutant titan overlord called Apocalypse. Yeah. So Apocalypse is this super powerful ancient mutant that took over the world and decided to enslave a lot of mutants that don't agree with him and kill off all the humans and all that uh, kind of like Holocaust style stuff. In this storyline, Magneto stepped in to save the world, and instead of uh, doing evil deeds, he rallied the surviving mutants around him, trained them how to fight, and lead them to go to war against the evil apocalypse. So this is a good guy, Magneto, and he definitely looked the part. This is a good-looking dude. Uh, and as you can see, even though he's pretty small by today's standard, it's a well-made action figure. There's a lot of details on his costume, and uh, he doesn't have a lot of articulation, of course, but he can move his shoulder, elbow, waist, hips, and knees. Although he has no dynamic sideways movement, everything is just on regular swivels. So he can turn his torso left to right, move his arms up and down, kick his legs forward and back. That's it. He can't even turn his head because of his long hair. Now there has recently Hasbro made a new modern version of this guy. I have not acquired him yet. I sadly have to cancel him because I ran into some financial tightness. I had him on pre-order, but I canceled him. Uh, that was kind of sad because I really wanted a modern take of this guy. Uh, but this Magneto from 1998 is one of the examples that I was thinking of when someone asked me a couple of weeks ago, is there a part of your collection that you're okay to sell off and part with? Maybe you can just sell off those. And I told him, I said, well, yes, there are some figures I have that no longer blend into my collection because they're too small. And figures today are getting bigger and bigger, so figures from the 90s no longer blend in. So there are figures that definitely don't fit with my current collection, and I might be okay selling them. But because how old they are, and they've been displayed outside their package, the money that I'm going to get for them is not worth it for the sentimental value they have for me. Take this Magneto for example. He's been my favorite Magneto, one of my favorite action figures from my childhood for like forever. So if someone comes to me and say, "Hey Johnny, will you sell me this old Age of Apocalypse Magneto for $50?" Oh, I would definitely sell him for $50. But realistically, especially he's missing his helmet and he's not in his original packaging, I know that the most I can expect for this guy is maybe $5. So would I sell a piece of my childhood memory for $5? Heck no. Now let our time machine take us forward to 2002 when Toy Biz finally decided to embrace modern action figure production and put their action figure more in line with modern scale, which means they no longer made 5-inch action figures. They went on and started making 6 and 7-inch action figures so they could be displayed with more modern collections. In 2002, Toy Biz had one of their hottest ever property called Marvel Legends. And in one of the earlier waves of Marvel Legends, whether you know it, was a Magneto action figure. And this remained my go-to Magneto for almost 20 years. That's how good this was. And this is one that you're looking at right now on the screen. This is Magneto in his most classic form. It is how most of us know him. The weird motorcycle style helmet and the big metal studs across his chest and the giant cape and he's definitely pretty well built. By the way, Magneto's official stat is he's 6'2" and 215 pounds. So he's definitely a big dude. Um, and this figure shows that he's got a nice physique to him. He's got a wide metal belt around his waist and metallic gloves and boots. Um, Now, in the early days, we thought that he's just basically his fashion statement, because he's a guy who controls metal, and so he got to wear metal belt and have all these metal pieces on him. But apparently, there's more to that. Like I've mentioned in his one of the things he can do with his power is when he's being attacked, he can mentally control all these metals on his person, and basically his outfit would turn into a suit of armor and make him very difficult to injure. Now, this Magneto is over 6 inches tall and definitely more in line with modern action figure. And more so, he is very posable. His arms, legs, shoulders, waist, head all move as they should. And there's very little that you want him to do that he wouldn't be able to. Even his finger can open and close. Now, his giant cape does make him a little bit top heavy, and because he's quite old, like I said, this is an action figure that's over 20 years old. His joints are getting a little bit floppy, but as you can see, he still stands fine on his own. Just takes a little bit of balancing and finicking. And even by today's standard, this is a perfectly serviceable Magneto action figure. Like I said, this was my go-to Magneto. I went 20 years without feeling the need of buying a new Magneto. That's how impressed I was with this guy. And of course, in addition to his really great range of articulation and really solid design, he has a removable helmet, so you can see Magneto's actual face under the helmet. As I mentioned, in this version, the classic version of Magneto, his hair is a lot shorter. He's not quite as good looking as his Age of Apocalypse counterpart, but it's still good to see his helmet come off like this. And this is not all. So what perhaps made this Magneto the ultimate Magneto of his time in the early 2000s was the base that he came with. There was a base that he could stand on. And now, a lot of time when you get an action figure that comes with a base, it's something really small, like a rounded disc or a square disc with a peg that go into their foot that keep them stable. That's about it. But this Magneto came with something a lot greater. I believe that I mentioned that one time Magneto destroyed a giant killer robot just by clenching his fist. Oh, well, here is the proof. The base for him to stand on is the destroyed head of a giant robot. I will look at this thing. It's got wires trailing out of it. It's like he messed this robot up, but good. And to give you guys uh, a better idea of just how big this thing is, let me bring Magneto back into the frame so we can compare this robot head to Magneto himself. Here is Magneto standing right beside the head of the robot he just destroyed, and you can see the head almost completely blocks the figure. So yeah, that's enough plastic right there on that robot head to make a second action figure. And you know what? Back in 2002, I bought Magneto here and this giant robot head that he uh, comes with for less than 12 bucks. Less than 12 bucks, and you get this. Nowadays, a regular Marvel Legend action figure is like 29 bucks, and you don't get nearly as much plastic as something like this from 2002. Oh, the good old days. So as I said, this Magneto served fine as my one and only primary uh, classic Magneto on my display for a long time. And finally, I think it was early 2021 or late 2020 that I was compelled to get a new Magneto. And here he is. This is the Magneto that was released by Hasbro uh, in also the Marvel Legends line. Hasbro took over the Marvel Legends property, I believe, in 2008, 2009. And they made this Magneto in around 2020. Now, on the offset, you guys can see that this is effectively almost the same as the 2002 Magneto made by Toy Biz. In fact, the 2002 Magneto has slightly better articulation and is slightly bulkier. This version of Magneto is kind of a little bit skinny. This reminds me a little bit of my first impression of him back in 1994, 1995. Kind of this, a little bit on the underfed side for Magneto. Uh, Now, the only reason that I got this Magneto is not because of him. The only reason I got this one was because he came in a three pack. He came in a three pack with his son and his daughter, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, uh, both of which I didn't have in my collection, and I decided, well, I might as well nab both of them at the same time. But there's no way to get them without them coming with Daddy Magneto here. That's why I ended up getting a new Magneto in my collection. However, honestly, uh, I I think for those of you who are more visual, you might say, "Oh yeah, this one has way better color." That really doesn't matter to me, honestly. I mean, for me, from a specifically tactile point of view, the 2002 Magneto actually feels more impressive and more worth it to me than this one. But this one's newer, and he does have one thing that the old Magneto didn't have. This Magneto comes with a pair of energy effect pieces that round circular swirls of energy that you can fit over his fist to sort of portray him using his power to control magnetism. So yeah, that's something that the old one didn't have. However, I think for myself, I'd rather have the giant robot head instead. In the end, love him, hate him, no matter if you think of him as a villain, a hero, an anti-hero, an evil character, or a tragic character, Magneto is one of those examples of someone who had tons of tragedies and trauma happen to him in his life, and yet in the end, he was able to rise above all that, becoming the leader of one of the most powerful groups of mutants in the world, single-handedly defeated some very powerful enemies and saved the world on multiple occasions. Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention that. Magneto, with his power to control gravity and magnetism, also can single-handedly generate a wormhole out of nowhere. I mean, that's crazy stuff. For those of you who don't know what a wormhole is, a wormhole is in science fiction like a black hole that if you go through it, you can instantly uh, go from point A to point B without having to traverse the distance. So, for example, let's say it takes you 10 years to go from Earth to Mars. I don't know how long it actually takes. I don't think it's 10 years. Let's say it takes 10 years to go from Earth to Mars. If you can generate a wormhole, it will open a black hole in the air in front of you, and you step through it, and you are instantly on Mars. You just it's like a super badass shortcut, super badass way to travel. And Magneto, for some reason, because of his control over magnetism, can do that. He can generate wormholes uh, single-handedly. And here we have all three Magnetos, and a Magneto from 1997, 2002, and 2020, standing together for a group shot. You can let me know which one of them you think looks better. Thank you for checking out today's Toy Thursday. We'll be back again tomorrow for Fitness Friday. For now, have a good rest of the day.